Hello, everybody, and welcome to Boxy Banter. I'm your host, Billy Ballas, and today we are talking about the Minnesota Twins. So, with me today, I have a former Minnesota Twin, Denny Hawking. He's a actually local boy from my neck of the woods. Went to a rival high school. He's from West Torrance High. I'll try not to hold that against him. He also played at El Camino. I know a rival junior college in the area of some of our former guests, actually. Played 11 years for the Twins, also for the Rockies and Royals. He has coached in the Orioles, Angels, and Mariners organizations. And bringing it back to the Twins, he is the first player in Twins history to be the father of twins, which I feel like they would be looking for people with Twins connections, but he was the first one. Denny, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Billy. It's good to be joining you. And to the best of my knowledge, I think Joe Mauer was the second twin to have twins, and the connection there is we both wore number 7.
That's
So no, but nobody's allowed to wear that number anymore.
that's as a good person to have something in common with. Yeah, we've had fans of teams and people who write for the teams and stuff, but this is the first former player, so I'm eager and interested to see your perspective on some of these players and some of the teams that we will be talking about later on the program. The Twins, they go all the way back to 1901 as one of the original American League teams there. They were the Washington Senators. Then they actually changed their name to the Washington Nationals in 05, and didn't officially change back to the Senators until 1955. However, they were commonly referred to as the Senators during that time. The San Francisco Giants almost moved to Minnesota in for the 1958 season, but Old Man O'Malley convinced them to move to San Francisco instead. So Minnesota was without a team until the Washington Senators relocated to Minnesota in 1961, and they became the Twins, of course, after the Twin Cities in St. Paul and Minneapolis. They originally played in Metropolitan Stadium. They were there from 61 to 81. Then the Metrodome from 82 to 09. They currently play in Target Field. They've been there since 2010. Denny, how was the Metrodome with the Homer Hankies and everything?
It was an unbelievable place to play. Earlier, you had mentioned Metropolitan Field, and they actually were transferred over to the Metrodome. They kept home plate of the original Met Stadium where it was, and it's actually currently in the Mall of America. So
Ah.
I'm not familiar if you know where that is, but it's funny. So home plate for the old Met Stadium is still in the Mall of America, but the Metrodome was, coming up as a young player, getting that as your home field, you didn't know any better. But looking back on it, you're like, wow, it's kind of run down and all that. We didn't really realize that. We were like, now we're in the big leagues. This is great. And when we started to play well is really when that fan base started to get behind us. And when we had fans in there, the energy would go up, the heat would go up in the Metrodome, and balls would tend to fly a little bit more. So when we were really good back in my days there in '02 and '03, the fans really came out and supported us. It was a great atmosphere. Definitely a home field advantage. Those Homer Hankies going wild. The interesting thing is what I remember about the Metrodome one, the roof was almost the same color as the baseball. So there were times when teams would come in and you'd hit fly balls and they wouldn't see them. The other thing that we really took advantage of was we were one of the few teams in the league at the time that had AstroTurf.
Mhm.
So when teams would come in, they would have to get adjusted to actually the speed of ground balls, and it wasn't so much infielders; it was outfielders. They'd take angles on balls, and balls would be by them. So it led to triples. I believe Christian Guzman in '02, I think it was, led the league in triples. So it was a highly competitive advantage that we had over teams coming in and playing at the Metrodome.
Yeah, and nowadays there aren't really any true domes. They've got those retractable roofs. I know in Seattle and Houston. I think I guess Tampa is one of the few actual true domes now. But you had the Metrodome, the Astrodome, the Kingdome, and yeah, those were I mean, yeah, when you had the energy in there, it really, the decibel level, I'm sure, was real high.
It was, and when we were not very good putting a quality product on the field, you could hear crickets there. You could hear. We always joked, you'd hear the beer guy there, the vendor. You're like, yeah, let me get a popcorn over here real quick. But when we put a good product on the field, the credit to the fans, on our fan base, they really came out in droves and gave us that good support. So it will get loud in there.
Yeah, and the good products on the field, those came in 02, 03, 04, three AL Central titles in a row. Then again in 06, a couple in a row in 09, 2010. Then most recently, 2019 and 2020, the Twins have won the AL Central. Also won the AL Wild Card in 2017. However, they do not have any pennants in this time frame going back to 1995. They do have 6 total, and they don't have, of course, if they don't have a pennant in this time frame, they're not going to have any World Series wins. But they do have 3 total. One of them back in 1924 in DC, then 87 and 91 in Minnesota. And one of the kind of dubious records that the Twins have is they've actually lost 18 consecutive postseason games going back to 2004, which is the longest postseason losing streak in the 4 major North American sports. Now, Danny, you played from the Twins from what years were you in Minnesota?
Debuted in 93. Last season was 03.
Last season was 03, and I mean 03 was before this postseason loss started. So I mean, I think we can just tie it right to you, right?
Why wouldn't we? No, of course. Let's just go ahead and do that. I'll take that.
Yeah, it's they, when you left the organization, they haven't won. So I think they need to bring you back into the Twins organization.
Well, that's also why they've retired my number. They spelled my name wrong on the back of the jersey, but that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah, and those retired numbers are, we'll start with number 3, Harmon Killebrew, who people associate with the MLB logo, although the designer of the logo said it was nobody. But Harmon Killebrew is number 3, his jersey retired. Number 6 for Tony Oliva. Number 7 for Denny Hawking and Joe Mauer.
Thank you very much. You're now my favorite podcast host.
Number 10 retired for the manager, Tom Kelly. 14 is retired for Kent Herbeck. 28 for Bert Blyleven. 29 for Rod Carew, the great Jewish ball player. Number 34, Kirby Puckett. And then, of course, 42 retired for Jackie Robinson. So yeah, that's did you play under Tom Kelly?
I did. Actually, everybody you mentioned right there in the retired numbers, I've had a chance to interact with through my days in Minnesota, except for, the late great Jackie Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
I had a chance to do winter caravans with Harmon Killebrew. And if you've ever seen a Harmon Killebrew autograph on a baseball, it is to the absolute point perfection of how you would look at somebody and be, I can understand every single letter. It is perfect. And I can remember when we were on caravans together, I would sit before him so people would get my autograph and then his. And he kept looking at baseballs and looking at, and then finally we're in the car one day and he's like, hey, can I ask you something? I was like, sure. And he goes, why do you sign your name like that? And I was like, well, it's just kind of my autograph. What do you mean? I had no idea what he was doing. And then let's just put it this way. I had an education on how to sign my name, just because his was so perfect. And what a great human being he was, and definitely well respected throughout the Twins community, Twins country, but yet also through Major League Baseball as well. Tony Oliva was always there in spring training. Let's see, obviously Joe Mauer, what a great kid, born and raised in Minneapolis, the suburbs there. Tremendous player. Who else? Tonio. Burt Blyleven. Burt Blyleven is he was the color guy when I was there. You know, he would help play by play in color when I was there. What a great guy. I know he was able to get on the field at some points during spring training, try to teach guys that unbelievable curveball that he had. Tom Kelly, number 10. I played for TK for most of my career there. Gardy took over in 2002. I played for Gardy for 2 years, but Gardy was also a coach while I was there and before he was the manager, and absolutely loved playing for Tom Kelly. And funny story about Tom Kelly is, you know, you've been to spring training sites, you've got the stadium, and then you have the backfields. Well, if you were ever going to Twins spring training and you'd step on the stadium before games, you're looking for Tom Kelly, you're completely looking in the wrong place. You'd have to go about quarter mile down the road and see him on the backfield coaching up the younger players and all that. And so he was always on the field, on the bottom field. And I asked him one day, I'm like, TK, like, why do you always come down here? You're always down here. I think you've earned the right to stay in the stadium and not make the walk. Isn't that? He goes, Dennis. He was one of the two people in the world that calls me Dennis, him and my mother. He goes, Dennis, I love being down here. This is where the true roots of the game. And when you think about my time in Minnesota, you know, the true roots were the fundamentals: throw the ball over the plate, get 2-strike hits, get 2-out RBIs. And that foundation really came from TK. Who am I missing? Kirby. Kirby, what an unbelievable guy. Great player, great guy in the community. You know, when he retired, when he got hit in the face and then developed glaucoma and having to retire from the game, he actually was in the front office doing special assignment stuff. I remember we go on the road and we come back to a homestand and he's sitting in the kitchen and he's like, hey, kids, sit down. You know, you had that pinch hit in Oakland. You took a fastball right down the middle on an 0-0 count. What are you doing? You think the manager sends you up there to take first pitch strikes? Are you kidding me? Swing the bat. So he was always full of education. Herbeck was just a large human being, really dependable. He's probably most noted for pulling Ron Gant off the base at first base in the 91 World Series. Was it 87? I'm not sure. It was the 91 World Series because I think it was the
Braves.
Was the Braves at that
Right.
point.
Yeah.
But what a great guy in the community. I'm sure he's up in Minnesota right now doing some ice fishing. And I think that's everybody. Carew. Oh, obviously, you know, the name Rod Carew speaks for itself. He was always very outgoing when he would come to spring training, and crazy how small our baseball fraternity is. I help out a U14 team here, and the head coach, his wife's brother, something like that, is like best friends, family, whatever. So there's a connection to Rod. And I can remember probably a decade ago, I was in a golf course pro shop, sitting there getting ready to check in, and I hear somebody say my name, and I'm like, who knows me? And I give it one of these, a little turnaround, and it's Rod Carew. And I'm like, hang on, let me embrace this moment right here. Rod Carew just said, hey, Denny. And I wasn't me going, hey, Rod, like a starstruck fan. So, but everybody on that retired numbers list, very good human beings, very big contributions, not just to the game of baseball, but also to the Minnesota Twins, you know, history as well.
It's always great to hear that great ball players are also great people off the field. Loving your perspective on all this so far. I'm looking forward to what else you're going to bring to the show. So in just a moment, we'll go over some of the other personnel in the front office and in the ownership box coming right up. Denny, every week we have a trivia question. Last week, we were talking about the Cleveland Indians. So Anthony Masterson was a guest on the show, and I threw him a question about the firsts at Jacobs Field. Now it's Progressive Field. So the ceremonial first pitch at Jacobs Field, the first grand slam at the Jake, first inside the park home run, first unassisted triple play, and first no-hitter ever thrown at the Jake. You were, I don't know if you have any guesses. These are pretty specific to the Indians. I don't know if you want to throw any guesses out there for any of those.
All right, let's see. So these are all Indians players that like the inside park homer is not a visiting player, right?
One of them, the no hitter, is a visitor. I think all of the others are Indians players. And so the Jake opened in '94. Um,
Uh,
I'll,
I'll take a guess at that one. I'm going to say the legendary Bob Feller.
that was a good guess. That's actually what Anthony guessed last week. I mean, it makes sense. He's, the greatest pitcher. It was actually Bill Clinton.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I would not have Bill Clinton on the Jacobs Field medal stand for first pitches. I would think, Bob Feller, Larry
Yeah.
Doby.
Yeah. No,
Would
those
have
are
been a
those
better
are
guess.
those make more sense. I know, Clinton, he's an Arkansas guy. I don't know what ties he has to Cleveland. I guess he was in the White House at the time. So yeah, I don't know how I've never seen footage of that one. I don't know how it compares to George Bush's first pitch there in the
On
'01 World
9/11.
Series.
That was pretty unbelievable what he did.
Yeah. First Grand Slam. Any guesses for that one?
When did it open again?
So it opened in '94.
94. Uh, Julio Franco.
It was so Anthony's guess was Jim Tomei. Correct answer, Paul Sorrento.
Paul Sorrento, big left-handed hitting first baseman DH.
Mm-hmm.
Paul
First,
Sorrento, I believe that he's also currently an Angels hitting coach in the big leagues.
oh, okay. First, inside the park home run.
It's got to be somebody fast. Kenny Lofton.
That's a good guess. Anthony's guess was Matt Lawton. Correct answer, surprisingly, David Bell.
David Bell.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe it took a couple Karens out there or something. First unassisted triple play.
Omar Vizquel.
There's been one, and Anthony got this one correct, Asdrubal Cabrera in '08.
Okay.
And first, and I believe only no hitter in the Jake. And this was a visiting player.
Okay. I'm going to cheat here. Give me a team.
Angels.
Oh, wow. Gosh, my own backyard. Who
I'll
threw it?
I'll give you the year. It was 2011.
Oh, wow. I'm just going to go with the sentimental guy. He probably wasn't there at that time. Bartolo Colon, because of his roots from coming up with Cleveland.
It was Irvin Santana.
Irvin Santana. Okay.
Yeah. And so last week on the show, I did say that Anthony got 2 out of 5 correct. And the 2 correct were the unassisted triple play and the no hitter. So this week's trivia question about the Twins, we've already mentioned, they've got that long postseason losing streak going. And they last won a postseason game, just a singular game in '04. So who was the winning pitcher for the Twins in their last postseason win?
Johan Santana.
Okay.
Yes.
That's a good guess. He was a great pitcher for the Twins. I'm sure we'll talk about him coming up shortly. And I will reveal that answer on the show next week. And listeners, if you want to throw any guesses out there on Twitter, Instagram at Boxy Banter, you can throw those guesses out there. And so let's get into a little more of the Twins. In the ownership box, they were owned by Carl Poland from '84 to '09. He had actually agreed to sell the team to MLB in '01 for $150 million, and the team was going to be contracted. But the Twins were forced to play out their lease in the Metrodome, so the deal was nixed, and the Twins are still around. And Jim Poland took over after his father's death, and he's been the owner since '09. Were the players aware of that potential contraction there? Was that something discussed often?
We were very aware of that. I was the player rep at that time, so I was in constant communication with the MLBPA. At the time, Bud Selig was the commissioner of baseball. And we kind of looked at it as that was basically the closest Major League Baseball team around us. And there was I should say some conspiracy on our part that we thought he was trying to contract us to where he was trying to get a bigger fan base for the Milwaukee Brewers. We didn't take too kindly of it. We thought we were a good team going into that 0-2 season with an opportunity to play well, to maybe do some special things, and which we wound up doing in 0-2. But we were well aware of it. We had constant conference calls. This was before the Zoom calls. We had constant conference calls about what we were going to do, and we kind of realized that it was if we didn't play very well and we had a horrible season, that it was going to happen. But we could, create our own destiny by playing well, and we did that. And we all kind of look back at that and think that selfishly we saved baseball for the great state of Minnesota, and the current field that they get to play in, Target Field. The guys in my generation there were the ones that really had a significant factor into allowing Target Field to be built and funded and all that.
Yeah, it's we've seen teams almost move. I know it's like Seattle, what was potentially going to move, and then they had that stretch in '95, and they built a new stadium. The Giants almost moved in the early '90s to Florida, and it seems like Florida is always like a threat. People are talking about moving there, but yeah, contraction is something completely different. It's almost out of a movie, like playing for the team's livelihood. Other than that, any other thoughts on the Polans as owners?
I know that we were so young at that time. My tenure when we were there, it was right when Kirby was getting out, Herbeck was getting out, all the veterans were coming out. We had so many young, hopefully future aspiring Major League Baseball players. So what we really focused on was on the field stuff. Now that contraction was a big thing when we got through that, but we didn't know much about the owner. We knew that his name was on the checks that we got every 2 weeks, but we pretty much at that time tried to take care of what we could control, and that was wins and losses on the field.
Yeah, it seems like nowadays, with baseball being such like so much more of a business now than it was then. Like owners are more well known, and they're in the spotlight a little more for a lot of times for not the best reasons, since they're not all of them are paying or attempting to win and going for it as much as some of the other owners, whereas back then it was not as big of a business. There wasn't as much money in baseball. Yeah. So those owners weren't always in the limelight as much as they are now. And it's kind of similar for the GMs, but some of the GMs they've had, Terry Ryan from 95 to 07, Bill Smith from 08 to 2011, and Terry Ryan again from 2012 to 2016, and their current GM, Thad Levine. So you played under Terry Ryan. Did you have much interaction with him as a player? And do you have any opinions on any of these GMs?
I did. I don't know Thad. Going back to Terry Ryan and Bill Smith. Bill Smith, before he took over the GM role, was I forget exactly what his role was in the front office, whether it was a assistant GM, one of those things. But Bill was always around. Had many conversations with him, about baseball, about contracts, things like that. Terry Ryan, before he became the GM, was the farm director. So when I was in the minor leagues, he was the farm director, and pretty scary stuff. Terry was not afraid to be truly honest with you. Sometimes the truth hurt. I can remember him saying things. It was a year that I was in Kenosha, Wisconsin in low A in 91. I remember I probably had like 47 errors that year. And after a game, he came up and he said, you got to stop sitting back on ground balls and relying on your arm. We need you to be a better defender and stop being so passive. And I was like, all right. So I remember that night I go out and a guy hits a ball to left field, and the relay comes to me, and it's just a simple single. And I remember catching the ball in a relay position, shallow left field. And I turned and thought the guy was off first base a little bit. And with my strong arm, I said, I think I could throw him out at first. And I threw the ball to like the popcorn guy in about the 15th row. And all I could think of was, oh my God, he is going to crush me in the clubhouse tonight. And I remember being scared after that game. And he walked into the locker room, and I probably tried to hide in my locker. He comes up to me and he's like, nice job on defense today. Way to be aggressive. You probably don't need to throw that ball in the 15th row, but it was much more aggression. And I'm like, oh my God, thank you very much. But that was my relationship with Terry. He was never afraid to be 100% honest with you. And there are guys in the game, in front offices, that aren't really like that. You can see through all the words that aren't really true. So I really appreciated Terry. He did a great job when we finally got good in those later years that I was there. He brought in the necessary people, Shannon Stewart, Rick Reed, that actually pushed us and propelled us over the hump to get in the playoffs and actually do some things in the playoffs back then.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting seeing those guys, how the GMs and stuff would come up through the program. And so yeah, coming up through the minors with you guys, is that's an interesting perspective. For the managers, I've got a little tidbit about each manager and see if you can identify the manager from that. I think there's a lot of pressure on you right here since you played for some of these guys, so you got to get these ones correct. The first guy, he is the winningest manager in Minnesota Twins history. I think somebody in the organization, if you go back to DC, has more wins, but in Minnesota, this manager is the winningest manager.
I would say it's Tom Kelly. He had such a long tenure there and 2 World Series titles. I would definitely say it was TK.
Yeah, so he was there from 86 to 01. Then the next guy is 6th all time with 85 ejections.
That's got to be Gardy. He was always fiery. And I think probably about 84 of those ejections were probably him sticking up for one of his players. So Gardy was great to play for as well. He was a coach. I kind of cut my teeth in the minor leagues in the after the seasons were over, going down to instructional league and doing a lot of work with not only Ron Gardenhire, but also Al Newman, one of the coaches, and really kind of getting the nuances of the positions on defense. And when TK retired at the end of the 01 season and Gardy took over in the 02 season, he was definitely, in our opinion, the right hire, because we felt the team was ready to take off and go in that special direction like some of the teams had in the past. And just the connection that he had with so many players on that team, we felt like he was the right guy to step into that managerial office. And lo and behold, he led us to the ALCS in his first year of managing.
Yeah, Tom Kelly, he retired. I mean, he was pretty young when he retired, wasn't he? Although he said that he was burnt out from baseball.
Yeah, he was. And I mean, that's what we got from him. But I think TK's vision after winning World Series in 87 and 91 was, and some lean years after that. I know right when I got there were some lean years, and just his willingness to build the organization back up. And then when it got to be ready to really make a difference in that Central and the American League, I think he was willing to take a step back and do more of an advisory role and hand the team off to somebody else. And that's why we really felt like Gardy was the right guy.
Mm-hmm. All right, then after that, their next manager was somebody who was originally drafted out of high school as a pitcher, and then he elected to go to college. And he ended up being one of only 5 players ever with 3,000 hits, a 300 average, and 500 stolen bases.
It's crazy. I was sitting here trying to think of who the transition was from Gardy until now, and I didn't know if it was the current manager. And I was like, wait, as you were talking about this, I'm like, how could I forget? It was my old airplane cribbage buddy, Paul Molitor.
Yeah, interesting that he was, looked at as a pitcher. I know I hear about some players nowadays as they're coming up, because in high school, it's common to be a two-way guy, and guys, sometimes different teams have different perspectives on different players. It's hard to imagine him on the hill, but apparently he was pretty good. But I think they made the right decision to put him in the batter's box.
That's so funny. Like, I never knew that he was a pitcher. I do know that, and I mentioned he was my cribbage opponent when we get on airplanes for the years that he was in Minnesota. And I can remember the best season I ever had in Minnesota was a year that I hit 202. Now, did I stat wise have better years than that? Yes. But being on the airplane with him, being in the dugout with him, I learned so much about how to deal with adversity, how to deal with failure, how to watch the game. It was, like I said, it was my best year in becoming and learning how to actually be a Major League Baseball player. And then the other story just goes, you look at Paul's, stats over the years that he played, the 20 plus years that he played in Major League Baseball. And when he was getting close to 3,000 hit, his 3,000th hit, we had the big numbers in right field above the baggie, and he was at 29.96. And we were on the last game of a homestand, and I get to the field about 1 o'clock, and I hear there's some batting practice going on at the field. So when you'd walk into the Metrodome, you'd walk in at a level, and then in order to go to the clubhouse, you had to walk down some stairs, walk through a concourse and all that, kind of like the dungeons. And I remember hearing somebody taking batting practice. I'm like, man, I think the other team's taking BP. So I go down there, and it's just him with our hitting coach, and he's hitting at 1 o'clock. And I'm just like, wait a minute. So we play the game, we get on the plane that night and start setting the cribbage board up. And I said, hey, I got a question. I said, you're taking extra BP today. So what's going on? And he's like, I'm just not happy with my swing. And all I can see is the big numbers of 2996. And I'm like, bro, you're 4 hits away from the Hall of Fame and you're not happy with your swing right now. And it was at that point that I really realized you're never going to be happy with your swing as a Major League Baseball player or as a baseball player in the game. Like, you were just, if you have a great swing, you're going to go to the cage and try to keep it. If you're not comfortable with your swing, you're going to go to the cage and try to revamp it. And watching his work ethic at that time, it kind of made me find a mirror and go, dude, you're probably not working very hard.
Yeah, that's a great tidbit on what makes, those elite players so elite. And then their current manager is one whose playing career was cut short due to a muscular disorder.
Rocco Baldelli.
Yeah.
I believe he drafted by the Red Sox, played for the Red Sox, and then he went down and down to Tampa and had a really good career. It's unfortunate that his career was cut short, but very instrumental. I thought he had a really good established career as a player, and now he's really doing a nice job of carving his way out in that managerial office as well.
Yeah. Now, you played under TK and Gardenhire. You currently manage in the minor leagues. Did they influence you in terms of your managerial style, or did anybody else have any impact on you the most, do you think, as a manager?
I think what I try to do when I'm managing a baseball team is I try to create an environment where the players want to get up in the morning and they're like, man, I can't wait to go to the field. And that's one thing that I really try to create when I'm responsible for a team. I do find myself saying things in the dugout that were Tom Kelly isms, Ron Gardenhire isms, things of that nature. One thing that I really look back on and think about where I was educated by both of those guys, TK especially, was when he never really came out of the dugout. Kind of a huge contrast in that area between him and Gardy. And I can remember anytime Tom Kelly would come out of the dugout to argue a call or to talk to an umpire about a play, I always remember him. He would say, now, you do realize I never come out of the dugout. But when I come out of the dugout, I'm probably pretty passionate, or I think you messed up, or this and that. And the respect that the umpires had, and you just saw them kind of like look off in the distance, like, you know what? I've been in the big leagues I've been a big league umpire for a decade, and this is like the third conversation on the field I've ever had with you. You know what? Let me get the guys together and see what they saw, because maybe I did miss this. And I've actually had conversations like that with umpires in the minor leagues. I'm like, how often do you and I ever have a conversation on the field? They're like, Denny, honestly, like, you're the least guy we ever have conversations on in this league. And I'm like, so don't you think I'm out here for some validity? I'm not just out here because I enjoy walking out of the dugout. And they're like, that's fair. So a lot of my managerial styles and how I treat people probably come from those two individuals. Absolutely.
Nice. All right. And so that's the personnel and the managerial, the front office and the owners. And then coming right up, we will look at some of the players from the past quarter century for the Minnesota Twins. So Denny, let's look at this Minnesota Twins roster I've assembled, and just a quick reminder to the listeners how this roster is assembled over a 25-year period. So this is from 1995 to 2019. You pick one player per year, cannot repeat players, and must form a coherent roster. So starting at the catching position, it's a pretty obvious choice here. Joe Mauer from 09. That was his MVP award season. He was worth 7.8 wins. Led the league with 365 average, 444 on base, and 587 slugging. Also led the league in OPS and OPS plus. OPS over 1,000, OPS plus of 171. That was his big power years. He hit 28 bombs that year. Justin Morneau, a kind of modern day Eminem brothers, following the mantle of Maris from the Yankees in the 60s. Justin Morneau at first base in 2010. He was worth 4.7 wins, hit 345, 437, 618. So he OPS over 1,000. His OPS plus was 187. Kind of an abbreviated year there for Morneau in just 350 plate appearances. At second base, Chuck Knobloch, back when he was still playing second in 96, he was worth 8.7 wins, led the league with 14 triples, 341, 448, 517 triple slash. At third base, Trevor Plouffe from 2014, hit 14 bombs, 258, 328, 423 triple slash. And rounding out the infield, the switch hitting, Jorge Polanco from 2019 is worth a hair under 5 wins, hit just about 300, 356, 458. So decent offensive production there from the shortstop. So Denny, what do you think on these guys? I know you played with at least one of them, I guess.
I played with Knobloch, yeah. Justin Morneau was just after me, but I was still in the game or just out of the game. So I was really familiar with Justin. And then obviously Joe, coming in right after I did. I was there when we took him number one overall as opposed to Mark Pryor. Plouffe, I didn't play with Trevor, didn't play with Polanco as well. But looking at this, obviously Joe Mauer is definitely on this list, and you probably could have taken any one of his number of great solid seasons. But the year that you took, where he's, what was he, Silver Slugger, All-Star Game, Gold Glove, MVP.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what a fantastic player that he was, and a huge contributor to the great state of Minnesota. Justin Morneau being an All-Star the year that he was selected to this roster was definitely one of those guys that when you would go into a series, managers, pitching coaches, pitching staffs, and catchers would look at Justin Morneau, find out if he was in the lineup, which he consistently was, and try to do their best to formulate a way that they could get him out. The one guy that I did play with was Chuck Knobloch. Chuck was a spark plug at the top of the order. Did a really good job of being a leadoff guy, setting the tone for that Twins team that year. Solid defender. I know he had his woes later on as he moved on, but not only was he a valuable player when he was with Minnesota, but when Pohlad and I believe it was either Andy MacPhail or Terry Ryan when they traded him to the New York Yankees, the surplus of talent that we got back in shortstop Christian Guzman, left-handed pitcher Eric Milton, and right-handed pitcher Joe Mays. I think we got Joe Mays in that trade. I'm not sure, but I do know that it was good. I think Joe came over from Seattle, but regardless, the two players that really stood out in that non-lock deal were Eric Milton, who wound up going on to have a nice, solid career in Minnesota, threw a no-hitter for the Twins, and then Christian Guzman held down that shortstop position for his years there.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the guys that I'm really familiar with.
Yeah, and Mauer, like you mentioned, the local boy, tremendous athlete. I think he was like the Gatorade National Player of the Year in football and baseball. Incredible.
And I saw the other day on Twitter where he's in some Twins fan was going through old photos, and it's him standing there in a basketball uniform when he was playing at Cretin-Derham, with four other guys that were All-American or all first team All-State in Minnesota. Joe was never short on athleticism or desire to be the best. I know that.
Yeah. And now into the outfield. In left field, I've got Josh Willingham from 2012. He hit 35 bombs that year, drove in over 100. In center field, Torrey Hunter hit 29 bombs, drove in 94, 289, 334, 524, triple slash. He was an all-star and a gold glover that year. In right field, Eddie Rosario from 2018. Hit 288, 323, 479, hit 24 bombs. And at DH, Miguel Sano from 2015 hit 18 bombs, drove in 52, 269, 385, 530, triple slash, OPS plus of 149. What was it like watching Torrey Hunter run down balls there in the Metrodome?
It was incredible, and it really led to what we did on the mound. Tom Kelly would talk about, and Ron Gardenhire would talk about, throw the ball over the plate. Don't you see who you got behind you? And back in those days, we were probably the best defensive team in the American League, and it all started with Torrey Hunter in center field. He was such a gifted athlete, such a great route runner. Sound like I'm talking about him on a football field, which he probably could have done as well. But tremendous leader in the clubhouse, and his ability to be able to run balls down in center field was a definite luxury, not only for the pitchers, but for the entire team, knowing that he was patrolling center field.
Yeah, he was a joy to watch. And I know he's got that iconic moment in the All-Star game when he robbed Barry Bonds. Fun moment. And yeah, great guy, defender out there. One of the elite guys, I think, at the fence. There's a handful of guys. I think, Griffey, Kenny Lofton have been really good going back, scaling the wall, and Torrey Hunter is in that conversation as well. Then on the bench, I've got Brian Dozier from 2016, hit 42 bombs that year, drove in 99, 35 doubles, swiped 18 bags. Should circle back to Chuck Knobloch real quick. He also swiped 45 bags. Torrey Hunter stole 23. Dozier hit 268, 340, 546 that year in 2016. Corey Koskie from 99. He hit 310, 387, 468. Kirby Puckett, the Hall of Famer in 95. This is just at the tail end of his career. I think his last year, had to get him on the roster. Don't get his prime years, but he hit 314, 379, 515, hit 23 bombs, drove in 99. And rounding out the bench, the backup catcher, Terry Steinbach from 98, hit 14 bombs, solid with the glove back there behind the plate. What do you got on these bench guys, Denny?
Probably just a story here or two about each one of these guys. Brian Dozier really carved out a nice career in Minnesota. Recently retired from the game, won a World Series with the Washington Nationals. Ironically, we're talking about the Twins, and then that connection with the Washington Nationals. Mm-hmm. So that's a nice little connection. I did see where former GM Terry Ryan had mentioned something about Brian Dozier when he saw him in the minor leagues. He's like, well, I guess we just drafted a shortstop, a middle infielder with no power. And then he goes on to hit 42 the year that he's on this roster. So I think Terry got a kick out of that. And I think he mentioned that in his comments. Corey Koski, a solid defender at third base and one of the toughest guys I know ever played with. I remember a game when we were going to go face Oakland, and Barry Zito at the prime of his career winning Cy Youngs was on the mound, and Corey had let everybody know that he was going to go hunt that curveball. And we were like, okay, you're going to go hunt the best curveball in the game tonight. Good luck with that. I think he had a hat trick, and he at the dinner table that night, he's sitting there, he's like, well, I think I'm going to have to reevaluate my plan when Barry Zito's pitching. But definitely a solid defender, made a lot of great plays for us to shut down innings and to hang zeros on the board. Obviously, Kirby, you can't talk Minnesota Twins history unless you talk about Kirby Puckett. I saw something about Kirby the other day, and I know my numbers will be a little bit off here. He played in, I think, 2 or 3 game sevens, or no, game sixes. I think it was like game sixes, and he had something like 7, 8 hits in game sixes, and 6 of those hits led to runs or put his team up in those. It's kind of wrong of me to say, hey, I think this is what happened. But if somebody does the research, what he did in game sixes throughout his career was truly astronomical. And then you can't talk about Twins, without having. It's funny. You look at the catching position. You got Joe Mauer from the great state of Minnesota, and you've also got Terry Steinbach as his backup. Terry, I believe, was from New Ulm, Minnesota. I don't know if I'm giving that city credit or if it was somewhere else that he was from, but what a great player. Had the privilege to play with him for a couple seasons. A true leader, and also anytime you can bring somebody into that prominent position of the catching role as a former World Series champion, your staff is only going to be better for that.
Yeah, and that 1991 World Series win that people always talk about the pitching matchup in Game 7, which was unreal. John Smoltz, Jack Morris, but yeah, they don't get to Game 7 unless Kirby Puckett hits that walk-off home run in Game 6. I don't feel like that gets talked about as much as it probably should.
And just having an opportunity to have bits and pieces of information behind the curtain from being a former player. I think Kirby walked into the clubhouse that day, and he was always the first one in. I remember when I was in the big leagues, in Minnesota, if you got to the field at 2:00, everybody looked at you like, why are you so late to the field? Like Kirby would get there 12:30, and he was always the tone setter in the clubhouse and on the field. But legend has it that he was in the clubhouse that day, and he said, "Jump on, boys." It was one of the famous phrases that Kirby would say, "Jump on, I'm driving the bus. Don't worry, I'll take care of us today." And then he goes and hits that late homer against Charlie Leibrandt to propel them into Game 7, and the great call by Jack Buck, Hall of Famer, saying, "We'll see you tomorrow night." You're right. I don't think it gets talked about very much at all.
Yeah. And now let's get into the pitching staff. We'll start off with Joe Mays, who you mentioned earlier. Joe Mays from 2001. He was worth 6.6 wins. He went 17-13. That's a lot of decisions. You don't see pitchers with that many decisions anymore. ERA 3.16. He had 4 complete games, 2 shutouts. He was a workhorse, over 233 innings, led the league in ERA plus at 143. Johan Santana in 04, the lefty. He was definitely going to be on this roster. In 04, he was worth 8.8 wins. He went 20-6. He was the Cy Young Award winner, and you'll see why, because he led the league in ERA at about 2.6, led the league in Ks, 265, in ERA plus, in FIP and WHIP at 182, 292, and .921 respectively. Also stingy with the hits, led the league, just gave up 6.2 hits per 9, and he struck out 10.5 per 9, which led the league. Another lefty, Francisco Liriano in '06. Just 28 starts that year, so not quite a full season, but he went 12-3 with a 2.16 ERA. He even had a save out of the bullpen. ERA plus of 208 in 121 innings. Irvin Santana, who had that no hitter that we mentioned in the Jake. I got him here for the Twins in 2017. He went 16-8, 3.28 ERA. And rounding out the rotation, Brad Radke from '97. He was worth 4.5 wins. He went 20-10. So again, a ton of decisions, 35 starts, 3.87 ERA, 4 complete games with a shutout, 239 and 2/3 innings. Yeah. So what? Any comments on these pitchers? I know you played with a couple of them.
Played with 3 of the 5: Radke, Mays, and Santana. And earlier you had mentioned Joe Mays and the number of decisions. 34 games started, 30 decisions. Radke, 35 games started, 30 decisions. I mean, those guys were really reliable pen savers. Those guys were going to get you, into the 7th inning, and then you could turn it over to other guys. You could turn it over to your 7th inning guy, your 8th inning guy, your 9th inning guy, and really shut games down. But the one thing I look at on this sheet of this roster of those 3 guys, of the number of innings pitched, you're looking at Joe Mays 233, Santana 228, Radke 240. Just the limited number of walks, and it really preaches to what the Twins were about back then under Tom Kelly at the end of his tenure, and then the beginning of Ron Gardenhire's tenure, of throw the ball over the plate. The defense works really hard. We're very talented. We're going to be in the right spots, and this is pre-analytics.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be in the right spots, and we're going to make the plays. And the ability for those guys to get ahead in counts, and and the strikeouts weren't very high, minus Johan Santana, who was absolutely dirty. But all 3 of the guys that I played with were really special in their own ways. And you knew that when you were going to the ballpark on days that those 3 guys were pitching, you were going to have a good chance to win a game, and not just win a game, but you didn't have to score many runs to be able to do that.
Yeah, and it probably was pretty relieving to have Johan on your team, so you never had to face him.
And he originally, when he first came up to us, he was out of the pen. So he first started in the bullpen, and then when spots came available in the rotation is when they really moved him there. So he's one of those relievers turned starter guy with a ton of success under his belt as well.
Yeah, and he was, the top pitcher in the game for a stretch right there. And this was part of that stretch. As we get into the bullpen, we'll start off with LaTroy Hawkins in '03. He went 9-3, 186 ERA out of the pen there for the Twins. Juan Rincon from '05, ERA of about 2.5 out of the pen. Joe Nathan in '08, he was worth 3.3 wins, 1.33 ERA, 39 saves there. In 68 appearances, he struck out almost 10 per 9. Juan Rincon also struck out just a hair under 10 per 9 innings. Glenn Perkins, the lefty from 2011, ERA at about 2.5, struck out 9.5 per 10, or 9.5 per 9 innings, excuse me. Anthony Swarzak from 2013, 3-2 out of the pen, 2.91 ERA, 48 games, 96 innings. So, he'll give you a couple innings, a multiple inning reliever. He was worth 2 wins there for the Twins. Bob Wells from 2000. Don't look at his win-loss record, but he had 10 saves, struck out about 8 batters per 9, and he could give you a lot of innings, 86 innings on the season. And rounding out the bullpen, Matt Guerrier from 2007. He was worth about 2.5 wins, ERA 2.35 in 88 innings. So he could give you, more than 3 innings, or more than 3 outs as well. So what do you got on these relievers, Denny?
Bobby Wells was a teammate of mine, very reliable guy that we came over from the Seattle Mariners. Remember when he was on the Mariners teams, you were like, oh man, not Wellsy coming in this game. he had such an unbelievable forkball. And when he was with Seattle, it was him from the right side and then Norm Charlton from the left side. So you got your fair share of balls falling off the table when you face the end of their bullpen. Very reliable, very dependable guy when he came over to Minnesota. A great teammate, good individual. Joe Nathan, what a job that he did in his tenure with the Twins, closing down games, finishing games, really helping them to win some of those division titles. And then lastly, the guy that I know I played with Rincon a little bit, but the guy that really stands out to me on this roster was LaTroy Hawkins. You know, what a great career. You look at the games pitched that he has, the organizations and the longevity that he had. And it didn't start out great for him. You know, he came up for some lean years, but really found his niche once he was in the bullpen. And I can remember that 0-2 team that we went to the ALCS on. You had Guardado at the end of those games. You had JC Romero and LaTroy Hawkins holding down that 7th to 8th inning. So you look back at those old Yankee teams with Wetland or Rivera at the end of those games and how you had to be ahead of the Yankees back in those days after about 5 innings. Because if they had to lead in the 6th, 7th innings, those games were pretty much finished. And what LaTroy Hawkins did when he was with us is he really shortened games for us. And if we knew that if we were up going into the 7th innings, we had a pretty good chance of coming away and shaking hands at the end of those games. Those are the things that I remember about our bullpen.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Love those comments. So yeah, that is the roster that I've got on the Minnesota Twins. And then we'll look at the guys who missed the cut coming right up. There are always constrictions and difficulties in putting these rosters together and getting all the pieces of the puzzle to fit. And in doing so, there's always some guys who get left on the cutting room floor. And so, Denny, first, I'm going to throw it to you. Who are some names that, you would, looking at this roster, kind of maybe expect to be on here, but who you did not see, who I missed out on?
You mean, Billy, other than guys like myself?
Well, yeah, that goes without saying.
Okay.
You were kind of you blazed the trail for guys like Zobrist and Kike and, those guys. I think you were ahead of your time. Your value would be much more appreciated today playing all over the field.
Oh, I appreciate that, but I was like, I have to poke fun at myself and all that. I see so many people do it on Twitter, but let's talk about some of the guys that I'm curious that you left off these rosters. Jock Jones, he was an integral part of my time when I was there. When he got called up, he was part of the Soul Patrol, which we had Matt Lawton, Torrey Hunter, and Jock Jones in the outfield. 3 guys that could play center field. It was a luxury for us to have 3 center fielders out there playing in the outfield. But I remember after the contraction talks during the offseason of 01 going into 02, started in Kansas City that year. Jeff Suppan, the Royals opening day starter, tried to throw a fastball by Jock Jones to start the season, and he deposited into the left center fountain over there at Kauffman Stadium. And it was probably at that time we were like, okay, boys, we're going to ride this thing out. So I know Jock had an unbelievable year, maybe his best year. What was that 02 team? Another guy that I'll look at and say Paul Molitor, wound up at his age. The year he had 3,000 hits, I think he hit 3,000 hits. I think he hit 340 around that year. And obviously, when I'm talking about these guys, I'm looking at guys that were instrumental while I was there. A guy that currently there that I didn't play with, but Nelson Cruz. I think he's done some remarkable things leading the Bomba squads in his tenure in Minnesota. He's not on that roster. And then probably one of the guys that on the pitching side of things, Eddie Guardado. Eddie Guardado was, I think, a 2-time All-Star, really held it down for us. And it's weird, the more that I mention all these guys, the more I'm like, wow, I think these guys were all guys that were on the 02 team, which definitely was our best experience and probably our most successful. So give me the reasons why those few guys are not on your rosters.
Well, I think you just kind of nailed it with one of those. When they're all on the same team, it's tough to and a lot of times when you have a great season, there's so many good years from players that align, and it's like I can only take one of them. So I think that's the biggest difficulty. When you have those like a great team season and you're only can take one player a year. Yeah, Molitor. Yeah, going back, you mentioned Molitor and looking it up. 96. He was 39. He led the league in hits with 225 hits. Hit 341. So yeah, that maybe I missed the ball there. I got Knobloch in 96. He had a monster year that year.
Yeah.
So it's tough. Molitor was DHing at that point. Played some first base as well, but
that 96 team, you had Knobloch leading off, you had Molitor hitting third. One of the best places to hit in the league was 2-hole for the Twins that year, because you had to deal with Knobloch when he was constantly on, him stealing bags, and then Molitor hitting back there. I know at that time I had hit second probably for a couple games, and Nobby would get on, I'd let him steal second, bunt him over to third, and take a no at bat, have an 0 for 0, which is a good day for me, and have Molitor pick up a stake. So I look back at that year in 96 and go, that was probably one of the best spots to hit in the order, in any order on any team that year.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, so that's what I got on missing out on those guys. I think I also a couple names that I had down. Or even it's tough to get the best seasons from certain players. I'm not sure if I got Torrey Hunter's best year. Radke might have been better in 99 as opposed to taking him in 97. So it's tough to get everyone's best year. The other name that I maybe could have taken Mike Trombley in 98, and then that would have opened it up to take Pierzynski in 03 as a backup catcher instead of Steinbach. Did you play with Pierzynski there?
Yeah, AJ and I were best of friends when he was in Minnesota. I think you got it right. No disrespect to AJ. He was a really good player for us. Wound up later on in his career being a world champion with the White Sox. But Steinbach, for me, it's a sentimental favorite being in Minnesota. So I think, I look at your rosters and difficult job, no doubt. And you definitely got so many of them right. I'm certainly not going to split hairs on you for those other things.
Yeah, and it is a fun process. And listeners out there, if you guys want to give it a shot, I've got a template on my website. So if you want to head to boxseatbanner.com, you can download the blank template. It's a Google spreadsheet, and you can create your own roster. And if you do, you submit that and send it in. And if anybody else out there has any disagreements with my roster, if you want to let me know what I missed out on, again, hit me up on social media and let me know what I need to work on this roster, and let me know who I missed out on. I'd love to hear the criticisms out there from the Twins fans. Denny, it's time to get to the Q&A section. We open it up on Twitter and Instagram each week. So again, listeners, make sure to follow on those platforms to get your questions in. First question comes from a former guest of the program, actually, Matt Hutchison. He always had a comment to me when we were watching baseball back in the day, when we were watching games at the Metrodome. What was up with the plexiglass wall out there in the outfield?
I think it kind of kept the fans off of the field. It was interesting. I look at the plexiglass, and I think it was only there for 1 or 2 years that I was there. But the plexiglass, when I think about it in the Metrodome, I think of Kirby going up and scaling the wall in the World Series, and not robbing a home run, because it would still be in play off the plexiglass, but just how high he got. And it reminded me of the great years for him. But kind of its own uniqueness, I'll say, to add to the Metrodome's uniqueness in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, were they trying to make it more feel like a hockey arena, since they're there in the north? They're kind of in hockey country, right? Where they just do they only know how to build hockey arenas, and they thought they were doing the same thing and were putting up a hockey wall or something?
Well, maybe they figured because the Vikings, it was the Vikings home field, and you had the big baggy, and right, let's add another sport in there, and the plexiglass will bring kind of the old North Stars back into play. So maybe that was their thoughts behind it.
Yeah, what was the deal? I know the Baggies, it was odd seeing the ball. Normally the ball clangs off the walls and ricochets hard, and then you got in Minnesota the Baggie just absorbing. I know you talked about earlier the home field advantage that you guys had there in the Metrodome, and was that soft outfield wall part of it as well?
Yeah, it was interesting. That was kind of one of the things that really gave us a home field advantage. There was it being in right field. If a ball would go down the right field line, like a ground ball, and it would circle around, outfielders would go to a certain section, and not playing there very often, they would go in and kind of like slam into the wall. Well, as you slam into that material, it bends like a fence. So you actually think you're stopping the ball. You're actually creating more room for the ball to get by you. And if you did that, you saw guys just, and now that ball's headed towards center field. You're like, oh man, you just saw the disgust on their face. Like, I got to go chase this ball. So there was a technique to going in and where you went into to the right field wall, and where you got into a barrier and you were able to hold your ground and not push that wall and create more area for the ball to get by you. The other uniqueness of it was on fly balls, when they'd hit the baggie and the baggie would absorb it, it would come down and land on the warning track, which was rubber. So it would hit the baggie, hit the rubber warning track, bounce up, and spin a different way. So it would spin back into the baggie, but yet once it would hit the ground again, it would spin back into the field of play. So if you almost think like a super ball or something like that, if you go out there and throw that ball around and spin it, it just kind of bounces all over the place. So that was another uniqueness of the Metrodome, and especially that right field baggie.
So later on, you played in Kansas City later on, right? When you were with the Royals, would you give advice to the guys on how to play the outfield there in the Metrodome?
Yeah, most definitely. Because when I was in Colorado, we never went to Minnesota, but when I went to Kansas City, I'd take the right fielder out there and say, "Look, any balls hit down here, this is how you want to go about doing it." And it was funny. Guys were like, "Man, I never knew that." Like, yeah, I'm not gonna give away our home field secrets.
All right, so I have some coaching experience at the high school level, and one of the things that I've gone over with the team before is it's a little bit of a visualization process. You got to visualize winning and success to achieve it, right? So we've practiced dogpiling on the field. And there's certain, it's always great when you can dogpile on the field because it means you've accomplished something great. But there's definitely an art to it, and you've got to stay safe, right? But that's not always the case sometimes, right? What was it like being at the dog pile and getting hurt? Because I think you going back, what was it, 02? Why don't you take us through that?
Yeah, oh, too. Celebrations can be a dastardly thing at times, if you're not prepared for them. Somebody will do something and make a big deal about it, and people watching go, act like you've done that before. Well, if you look back on those twin teams that I was a part of, that was the first time that we'd actually done something. So we had never been there before. We had never dogpiled on a field. We won that division by so much that, I think the celebration was in the clubhouse, not on the field. But going into that series against Oakland, we had won game 4, and we went back to Oakland for game 5, and we wound up winning that game. AJ Pierzynski hit a really big homer to put us up 3, I think, in the 9th inning. Game got close. I wound up catching the last out of the series to end the series down the right field line, and put the ball in my pocket, ran in, basically got like a 200-yard running start from the outfield, and jumped on the dog pile and had rolled over it. And I remember laying on the ground looking at Eddie Guardado, just screaming at each other. And I was like, man, let's go pop some champagne. Let's go pop some bottles. And I went to just kind of push my body weight up off the ground. And at that point, somebody had jumped over, and in your excitement, you're jumping on piles and not knowing how you're landing and all that. And somebody that had wound up jumping on the pile and flipped over, and the landing point happened to be my right hand middle finger. A spike went through the end of my right middle finger and broke my finger. Kind of a surreal moment, where I had been through so much personally that off season before, of the contraction and trying to get those guys to be a part of the conference calls and such, where and wound up having the opportunity to play in that game 5 and play a significant role in it, and helping the team and the organization advance to the next round. Breaking my finger, walking off the field, finding the trainer, and being in the clubhouse and everybody popping bottles in the clubhouse while I was on the training table getting my finger mended, was kind of a bittersweet moment for me. But if that's what happened, and we were still able to advance, I'll take it. So you got to be careful on those celebrations, man.
Yeah, any advice for future teams there and how to celebrate?
Treat it like COVID. Stay 6 feet apart. Do some elbow bumps, and everything will be fine, I guess.
Well, even, I mean, you got to be careful with the elbow bumps too. I mean, Bellinger had a dislocate, popped his shoulder out after hitting that home run in Game 7 of the NLCS this past year, 2020. I always kind of say, like, because we we saw it happen a few years ago in the College World Series. UCLA, I know, when they won the Super Regional to advance to the College World Series, they dogpiled, and their like star second baseman broke his wrist and was out for the World Series. My kind of line of thought is, you don't go to the ground until the last game of the year. If you win you win your division and get into the playoffs, you win a playoff series, you advance to the College World Series, you can celebrate together, but you don't dogpile on the ground. That's what I kind of think.
I think you're onto something here, Billy. I think that's a great way to say it. If and when you celebrate, you have to, like, you're preparing your guys to win. You're preparing guys to be successful. And in order for that to happen, you should also prepare yourself to how you treat those celebrations. And I think you're onto something, my man. Stay off the ground until it's the last game.
Yeah. Now, also, you coach manage in the minor leagues. What's it like coaching in the minor leagues, and how do you balance maybe the developmental aspect of it and the winning aspect of it? Because I know that those are not always the same thing necessarily.
No, and developing and winning are two completely different things. You're able to mend them as games go on, but truly love my experiences being able to be responsible for 25 guys. And what I try to do is I try to create an environment that's going to make the kids want to come to the field every single day. You're going to get better in the weight room, off the field, but for me, it's about that development. And if you're an A skill player, keeping them an A skill player, getting them to the next affiliate. If you're a B player, skill wise, getting you to play above your skill set, and maybe turning players into an A skill set level, taking C players and turning them into B players. And that's kind of what I really try to do, creating that environment, creating them, teaching them how to be pros, little nuances that I was afforded the luxury by being around, legendary players with the Twins, Paul Molitor, Kirby Puckett, Dave Winfield, all guys that took me under their wing. So I try to pass that along. And then as far as the winning, that's the developmental side. But the winning side, I usually reference Tom Kelly when we talk about winning. And we had guys like myself, Brent Gage, Ron Coomer, with an influx of a lot of rookies for a couple of years there. And I know that TK was, he would, and he told me this, he's like, look, we're trying to develop kids at the major league level for 6 innings. If we're in the game in the 6th inning, I'm going to throw a veteran out there in a big at bat or a big defensive spot or a big pitching spot, knowing that they're a little bit more trustworthy. So I kind of look at, I don't want to say I necessarily sit on my hands for 6 innings in the minor leagues, but I like to let the kids play for about 6 innings. And as the game's tight, 7, 8, 9, I usually try to go, okay, how can I put my imprint on this game? It could be through a conversation in the dugout. It could be a mound visit. It could be putting on a sign. It could be moving a guy defensively, but really allowing them to take their skill sets and their knowledge from what they learned from 2 o'clock to 7 o'clock and seeing how they implement it at 7 o'clock on.
Yeah, and I know at the high school level, which I'm familiar with, everybody kind of aspires to be a big leaguer, and then we see those guys on TV and we go to the stadiums and just we want to be pro baseball players. So I think the players kind of have that look as they kind of project themselves onto being those pro players. And as a coach, we're obviously high school coaches are far from professional baseball. But we kind of project ourselves too. I know when I coached freshman baseball, the lower levels, I kind of felt like a minor league coach at times because, I got to listen to the guys at the varsity level. They're kind of, I'll play this guy this position and this guy here, and it may not be the best for winning a game that particular day, but I know in the long run. So I know that that's on a much, much smaller scale than you guys there in actual professional baseball. But I feel like I've got a little bit of a connection there doing it there at the amateur high school level.
Yeah, that's about how it is. You want to run your team how you want to run it, and put in your characteristics and the knowledge that you have. But at the same time, there's somebody in your ears saying, it's either, hey, no, let's do it this way. And that happens a lot in the minor leagues. And usually what you hope for is to somebody, for if they want you to change things, they usually you're hoping that they ask you, hey, why are you doing it this way? Why wouldn't you do it this way? And if there's good communication from level to level, and somebody gives you a reason that makes more sense, then I think everybody's always open-minded about it.
Yeah, how much in terms of that communication between the systems and the different levels, how much similarity is there? I mean, do you guys use the same terminology for different things, and just in terms of the cuts and relays and maybe different signs that you guys use? Is it similar throughout the organization, or is it
the stuff that you do fundamentally, the PFPs, pitchers fielding practice, the pop-up communication, the relays, all of those are very similar. And it all starts with the big leagues, how they're going to run it. I know when Cano was in Seattle, he wasn't particularly fond of being a trail guy on balls down the left field line. So what you're trying to do is, if you're doing it at the major league level a certain way, you want them to be able to do it the same way in the minor league. So AAA, AA, those guys, when balls would be hit down the left field line, they would never do a double cut down that left field line. It was just the shortstop going out solo. So if you got to the big leagues and you were playing second base, you didn't all of a sudden run over there and then everything's out of whack. But yeah, terminology is the same. Signs usually differ from managers. Some guys are a little bit more intricate when it comes to calling pitches or controlling the run game. I like to let my pitching coaches and catchers really handle those things. If I get a hunch on something, I'll whistle at the catcher and give them a little bit of what I'm looking for, or when a guy comes up, something of that nature. But for the most part, everything is pretty in sync from level to level.
All right. Yeah. Interesting perspective. Love that. And there's so much attention to the major league level, and I don't think the minor leagues and that whole process gets brought up enough. And I think that's, something that the casual fan doesn't necessarily understand, but it's very important to the game and for the players to be ready when they get to the big leagues. So love that perspective. And again, if listeners, if you guys to submit questions in the future, you can do so on social media. We've looked at the roster. Now it's time to grade the roster. So Denny, what do you think some strengths and weaknesses of this roster are, and what letter grade would you assign it compared to all of the other teams? I know that I have access to all of that. You can kind of hypothesize how you think it would do against other teams. So what do you think?
Well, I'll tell you this. I think games are won at the starting rotation, and being very familiar with some of the guys, Mays, Santana, and Radke. You know, I think you're going to be in just to start off series. You're going to be in what is that, 60% of those games, and then you have a solid guy in Joe Nathan closing it out for you. So I think it's really competitive. The starting rotation and then your closer are definitely, for me, looking at it as an A. Another A that I really like on this roster is your catching position. You've got the young stud, the phenom, and Joe Mauer, who's as good as anybody, you know, that plays that position, and a solid backup veteran leadership in Terry Steinbach. So I'm going to give those two spots A's. And then, you know, for me, those are the real strengths. Looking at the overall roster, I think you did a really good job of comprising a 25-man roster that's going to be super competitive. You know, guys that at the top of the order, in the middle of the order, you got table setters. You've got guys that are capable of driving in runs, you know, and you've got guys that can take a day off, and there's not a huge fall off when you give a guy like a Torrey Hunter a day off. I mean, you know, take Torrey Hunter out and put Kirby Puckett in center field. I certainly don't think that's a drop off. But I'm going to go ahead and look at your overall roster. And first of all, congratulate you on a job well done. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a solid B plus, probably a B, but I'm going to say a B plus just because of my roots from Minnesota. And I want to make you look good and give you all the credit.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely cannot argue the strengths of the catcher. I think Mauer, in terms of looking at the other rosters, he's in the conversation. I think him, Piazza, maybe Pudge, probably have the best. Posey, I think you can also throw in there. I think those are the top catcher seasons that I have in the past quarter century. So yeah, Mauer, definitely the strength of the offense. But Knobloch had a great year. Other than that, they're kind of, when I compare them to the other teams, they're a little bit below average across the board offensively. Looking at the pitching staff, yeah, Johan is a true ace. He had that time there where he was the best pitcher in baseball. Liriano was the lights out in that kind of abbreviated season from him. And pitchers, comparing them to the other rosters, they're pretty average across the board, which is, I mean, it's, you know, that's not a bad thing necessarily. They don't have the biggest names, again, aside from Johan. They don't have the biggest names on that pitching staff, but they did get the job done. But I think that average pitching staff with a slightly below average offense, you know, outside of Mauer and probably Knobloch there, I think they're a little below average overall when I compare them to the other teams. So I'm gonna be a little stricter, a tougher grader than you. I think they're a D overall if I were to line them up against all of my other rosters. So it's tough criticism from me, but that's the way how I see it.
No, I think that's good. I mean, being able to criticize yourself like that, I think is great. Having the access and having the rules that you go about it. You know, the things that I look at is not just offensively. When I talk about the staff, it's guys that are going to throw the ball over the plate. You know, Knobloch was a tremendous defender. Torrey Hunter, a tremendous defender. So I look at, you know, where my grade of giving that a B plus, obviously a little bias, but at the same time, knowing how games are won, throwing the ball over the plate, making the routine plays. And I think looking at this roster, it is more of a roster that's constructed more to the history of Minnesota Twins baseball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So that's what we got on the grades for this roster. It's time to wrap up the episode on the Twins. So Denny, what are your final thoughts about the Twins?
Well, first, I just want to say thanks for having me a part of your podcast, man. It was a cool opportunity to, you know, put the seatbelt on and go down memory lane with some of my times in Minnesota, some of my former teammates, and looking at a roster brought up a lot of really good memories. So definitely a cool experience. I hope the fans have a lot of reactions to it, a lot of opinions. I don't think in situations like this, we're always going to be right or always going to be wrong. Be interesting to see where fans feel like they could construct a better roster. But like I said, Billy, it's a really cool to take a trip down memory lane and think about some of the good times that I had in the organization, and proud to say I was a part of the Minnesota Twins and being a part of that community as well.
Yeah, the Twins to me, they always seem like a fun team to root for, even if as a fan of baseball, like I don't have any real association with the Twins, but like whenever they're, in the postseason or something, they're always like if they're in a series, I'm probably going to be rooting for them. If it's them against the Yankees, yeah, I'm going to root for the Twins. If they're playing, I know this year they played the Astros. It's like, yeah, the Twins. They're just a fun, easy team to root for. That, because if you don't have any association with teams in a series, you're naturally going to pick one. And it seems like the Twins would be the team that I would always pick. They play in that beautiful new stadium, Target Field there. And I just hope that, they can get back to the postseason and get a win so that they can kind of get that monkey off their back and don't have to keep on talking about that 18 game losing streak in the postseason. So, I think we've kind of figured out the problem there. I think they need to bring you back into the organization somehow, and then they can, win another postseason game and win a postseason series. I think that's pretty much what they need to do.
I think over the course of almost 2 hours, I think we've kind of pinpointed that they need to bring me back just for the opportunity to get back to a winning, shaking hands after a postseason game. And then we've got to bring you in so you can educate the guys on how to treat that and stay off the ground. So I think we got it. Who do we call?
That's perfect. Yeah, let's call up Thad Levine. Let him know. All right. Yeah. Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Denny. And like I mentioned before, previous guests have been fans of the team's writers. So it was very interesting to get the perspective of somebody who's actually played in the organization and played with several of these players. So I'm sure that the listeners have enjoyed listening, because I've enjoyed talking and, learning and hearing some great stories and the perspective, not only as a player, but as a manager in professional baseball. So again, thank you for taking some time and joining me here on the show today. Thanks again, Denny.
Well, Billy, I appreciate again the opportunity, and you do a great job on this. And I hope the fans enjoy listening to you and what you do. And hopefully I'll use a golf reference and just say, hopefully I brought them inside the ropes during our podcast.
All right. Thank you. This is Billy Ballas of Box Seat Banter signing off.